Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 12:38 is the time. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Delighted to be joined right now by Andrew Fawkes. He's a defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society and a former military man himself. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what a really auspicious day. 1,000 days now since the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces back in February 2022. At the time, Vladimir Putin said it would be a matter of days before they took Kyiv, matter of weeks before they took the whole country. Didn't quite work out like that. We're now in a raging battle still in the east of the south of the country. 1,600 Russian troops either killed or seriously injured every single day to take a matter of a few miles of territory. Threats from Donald Trump when he becomes American president on January the 20th that he will make sure there's peace within one day. And these ongoing rows about these long-range missiles. Russia has said today that those long-range missiles from America, the ATACMS, have already, given after permission from Biden on Monday, have already been used on Russian territory. Threats of a tangible, in Kremlin's words, response, possibly even nuclear. How bad is it right now, and where are we heading, Andrew?
We've heard the word red line, or the words red lines, a lot over the last 2-3 years. There was a red line on provision of HIMARS, the artillery system, to Ukraine. There was a red line on the Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine. There was a red line on modern Western tanks to Ukraine. There was a red line on F-16s as well. And all of those red lines have been crossed with pretty much minimal comeback from Russia. In terms of nukes, Putin said he would use nuclear weapons in the event of an existential threat to the Russian state. It's very hard to argue that firing ATACMS into Russia is existential for them. So I'd be very surprised if Putin escalated to nukes. And of course, mutually assured destruction, our old friend from the 70s and 80s, is still hanging around, and we still have nukes too.
Yeah.
And it would be a deeply foolish move for Putin to escalate to that level. So yeah, that's kind of where it stands. I mean, I don't think it's going to make any kind of a decisive difference in the war, Ukraine being able to strike inside Russian territory, but every little helps.
And yet there's been so much focus on it. It seems that since all the way back from February 2022, it's been a constant sort of battle of going on in the West of, which countries are going to support Ukraine, what are they going to give them? Are they going to say they're going to give it and then not actually deliver it? And when they deliver it, are they going to provide the backup, the maintenance, the training for it? And then each time it's been, we need jets, we need the tanks, we need the long-range missiles as well as the short-range and the medium-range missiles. And then each thing that's asked for, gradually, very slowly, the cranking wheels of international diplomacy, they eventually do get offered and do get used. But it doesn't seem to be turning the war around. There were so many hopes about, 6 months, a year ago, that Ukraine could turn it around. Russia, if you actually look at the map, Russia has not taken that much Ukrainian territory, but they've taken some very important strategically territory. In terms of how this ends, assuming it ever does, there are wars that have never ended that carry on the skirmishes, and it's been going on since 2014, realistically, not just since 2022. What is the process by which it could end? What would Putin be willing to accept? What would Zelensky and the Ukrainian people be willing to accept?
My concern at the moment is the deal that people are roughly talking about, essentially freezing the conflict in place. Yeah. It's really a win for Russia. They will have seized a significant strategic piece of Ukrainian territory. They will have conducted a variety of appalling war crimes with absolutely no comebacks. And, in any ceasefire negotiation, the kind of one sop they've said they're prepared to throw is EU membership for Ukraine. But the rest of it will be EU membership of NATO, keeping the terrain they've got, a Russian-facing presidency in Kyiv. And these aren't really options that Ukraine can accept. And the real issue, I think, with Mr. Trump's position is that he might well be condemning hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians to death, because I'm not sure Ukraine are in a position where they can surrender on those terms.
Well, that's the thing. I've asked repeatedly, whenever we've discussed this on social media or here, which part of Britain would we be willing to give up to an invading force like that? And then people then unhelpfully do actually suggest a lot of places. London often comes up. It has to be said. But the reality, what people have gone through in Ukraine, the number of lives lost for them, the devastation to their towns and villages and cities, and their economy, it's just been children abducted. I mean, thousands of children abducted to Russia, never seen again. You know, no nation state would put up with this. And of course, there are still so many people in the West and you know, supported by those Russian bots that are all over everywhere, telling us that, you know, this is a war that, you know, it was Ukraine's fault. It was, you know, and the West's fault. Putin had no choice because it was supposed to be a buffer state, and it's not a war we should worry about. It's not our problem. It's their problem. Why is what happens in Ukraine our problem? Why should we still care?
So there's a geopolitical alignment, which is a really boring academic way of saying it depends what kind of world you want to live in. Do you want to live in a world that still is dominated by a Western way of thinking where we cherish freedom and democracy and our values? Or do we want to live in a world dominated by the Chinese-Russian alliance where totalitarian states get to dictate to the rest of the world? And this is really the pivotal battle of our time, is authoritarian dictatorships versus the Western freedom and democracy that we've taken for granted since the end of 1945. And this is really playing out in Ukraine right now. And if we give Russia a victory, that is going to embolden them and China in future. So we will see a war with Taiwan. We will see increased subversion around Europe as Russia tries to undermine our democratic systems.
And which it's doing right now. It's doing it in Georgia, it's doing it in Moldova, it's already doing it in the Baltic states, which are NATO members. Sweden, I mean, goodness me, the Swedish government have actually issued statements to citizens telling them to prepare for war. I mean, they've actually, you know, they are taking it that seriously. We've seen Sweden and Finland, applying for swift membership of NATO because they are so fearful. Finland knows full well what a Russian invasion looks like. It's happened to them before. But this is the thing, what I find amazing, whether it's Donald Trump, his aides, or anyone else saying, well, you know, just do a deal, get peace. That's better than war. You know, and so do they genuinely think that Vladimir Putin is going to stick to whatever territory he's able to take this time? Why on earth would we trust the word of a man who is a proven liar and murderous dictator?
Well, why indeed? And, you know, Russia have signed documents in the past saying that they would protect and respect Ukraine's borders. Yeah. That they're obviously in clear violation of. And we also agreed that we...
I was just going to say, we also have a duty of care along with the US.
And we failed in it so far. As far as I'm concerned, over the last 1,000 days, we've protected Russia from the consequences of its actions, whilst forcing Ukraine to fight with one hand tied behind their back. And it's appalling. And there's a lot of Ukrainian blood on Western leaders' hands for the delays and the politicking that have been in getting the right equipment and
And fundamentally, that's about weakness, isn't it? Because we're told, well, we don't want World War III. But Vladimir Putin knows that the West is weak. He knows it's right. He knows that people worry. OK, we've got no money either. But he knows that, and he plays on that. That he knows that Western economies can't just put 40% of their government spending into military like he's done. And he's playing on it. But when your adversary knows that about you and you don't do anything to change that, I mean, we're in very dangerous territory, aren't we?
Well, that's the great strength that the totalitarian states have in this battle against democracies, is we have accountability and politicians have to justify their decisions to their electorates, whereas he can do whatever he wants, and so can President China. So can the Ayatollah in Tehran.
Well, mentioning Xi Jinping, an urgent House of Commons has been an urgent question from the opposition about arrests in Hong Kong and pro-democracy campaigners who've been jailed, some for up to 10 years, total of 45 of them in Hong Kong. I mean, these aren't people who broke what we consider laws in this country. These are people simply, trying to actually stand for election, supporting people who just want a democracy in Hong Kong. Something, again, we signed a treaty that we would support and the rights of people in Hong Kong. Again, we ain't good for our word anymore, Andrew. We really are not. And the Chinese obviously have full control of Hong Kong now. And these people, a day after, within hours of Keir Starmer sitting down for a nice meeting face-to-face with Xi Jinping of China at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, they basically orchestrate the jailing after mock trials of democracy campaigners. I mean, the West doesn't know what it's doing anymore. Are we ever going to stand up for anyone ever again?
No, I think we still have a hangover from the era where the Berlin Wall came down and we assumed that was the end of history and everyone was going to be a Western liberal democracy from now on. And we had a degree of hiatus between that way of thinking when the jihadist threat came up and Iraq and Afghanistan happened. But now we're in an era where our totalitarian enemies have had 20 years to work out what our weaknesses are and attack those through a variety of democratic, economic, subversive and military means. And we are now on the back foot trying to catch up, and half of our countries don't even realise that we're in this fight quite yet. And we are. Ukraine is the front line.
Absolutely. Andrew Fox, really appreciate you joining us. He's a defence expert, research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Sam Armstrong, I do think that people simply don't get what an existential battle we're in with the autocratic, axis of evil that we're in. I don't. When people on the left often throw around the 1930s references. When the 1930s is staring you in the face, they don't see it.
We are being boiled slowly like frogs so that we don't notice. Look, here's the truth of it. We went through the last century in the Cold War against the USSR, which was no doubt an existential threat, and people recognise that. But all through that time, it was a much, 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 much smaller economic force than we were. It was a smaller geopolitical force. And the same just will not be true in the next century.
Absolutely.
China will be bigger than us, stronger than us, wealthier than us, and it's coming for us.
I mean, again, people just got to get it. Just going back to the farmers' protest before we go to a break.